So we got the wiring harness put in, so Nathan's going to walk us through wiring it to the actual vehicle. And we always start by disconnecting the vehicle power source by unplugging the ground, removing the seat, and that gives us access to install the fuse block and attach it to the vehicle. So we'll let Nathan walk us through that process.
So one of the most important things to do before you start working on your Sprinter, especially the electrical sense, is to disconnect the battery. So we're going to go next to the gas pedal, and there is a disconnect that we're going to take off. If your van has an auxiliary battery under the hood, you're going to want to go under the hood and disconnect that too. Great. So you're going to see a panel here next to your gas pedal, which is the smaller of the two panels. And what you're going to want to do is grab the upper left-hand corner and pull down and out. And it's going to pop out like that. And then lift. So you're going to see a red and black plug. And that is on a silver stud. And what you're going to do is simply pull that plug off the stud, which is going to disconnect your battery. And once that's disconnected, you just want to let it rest down so it's away from the stud. And then your main battery for your vehicle is disconnected. And again, if you have an auxiliary battery, you need to disconnect it under the hood as well. So what you're going to do is disconnect the red and black plug from the silver post. So you're going to pull it back and let the plug rest down, and then your main factory battery will be disconnected. So we're going to remove the seat and disconnect the electrical connections from the seat to give us full access to the seat box. So to start, we are going to remove the 4 seat bolts in the corners, and those are going to be a 10 millimeter. And then go ahead and feel free to slide the seat around as you're working on it. But remember, when the last bolt comes free, the seat will be free to tip forward. So I've got my arm supporting it right now. So now the seat's free. And we're going to rotate it towards you so you can see the electrical connection. So this large plug here contains all of the electrical connections. So you're going to pinch these two things towards each other and remove them like that. Okay, so now we are in the seat box, and this van has a factory auxiliary battery. So the first thing we're going to do is work on getting a little bit of access to an area we need access to. So we're going to remove this plastic bridge piece, and there are 2 bolts we need to get to do that. So the first one is open on the front here, and you can remove that one. Now to get to the rear one, we've got to take a couple pieces out. We have a 3-post section here, and there is a tab towards the rear of the seat box that you just need to bend back and lift that out. And that'll clip out. There are no fasteners. Then you have a relay with a tab on the back as well, so you bend that back and lift that out. There that is. And this fuse block might come with it too, that's no big deal. And then in this square section, there is a fastener way down in there. So I've got an extension on my impact driver, and we're going to get all the way down in there and loosen that. And once you do that, you can lift this bridge. So now the whole bridge is going to come out like that. Now, when you have this removed, you can, if you have enough room, you can kind of just turn it to the side and you'll have access to the entire rear area. So if you want to, if it's moving weird on you, you can zip tie it to something or tape it. Another thing to know is just grab that bolt out of there so you don't lose that. So now that we have that open on the back of the box here, we're going to lift the rubber piece up and put that aside. And now we're going to bring our power cables through the opening on the back of the seat box. And so we're just pulling these all the way through, and then you can go ahead and kind of get them out of the way for the time being. So now we're going to locate some componentry. The first thing we're going to locate is the fuse block. And the fuse block, in this case, is going to live right over here on the back wall. And the other component we have to locate is the breaker. And the breaker is going to live next to that. And you can put it just about here. So both of these items we are going to dual lock onto the rear area of the seat box. Dual lock is a very fancy Velcro for all intents and purposes. So what we want to do first is we want to take this primer pen and we want to prime the surface, because that'll let the dual lock stick better. So I'm going to take this primer pen. You probably recognize this from your fan install. I'm going to do three different parts. So I'm going to prime the back of this, and the seat box itself. So just crush, snap, hear a little glass breaking noise, shake it up, and you should see the tip kind of wet, and we're gonna go ahead and start painting. You got enough time that you can kind of be thorough with it. On the fuse block, we're going to mostly focus on the top half of the fuse block, which we'll see why we do that in just a minute. Here we go. And then back here. And I'm just going to do big, long stripes all the way across the back. We want to basically prime the whole middle and passenger side of this metal punch out here where it kind of comes out. Now that we've got that done, we can start getting some dual lock ready. So you're going to have little sections of dual lock just like this, and we are going to start attaching those. So basically, you're going to have enough so you can put a couple on each. So we're going to do 2 on the breaker and 4 on the fuse block. So line these little guys up so they're square to each other, and then peel off one side and stick it, you know, over here. The exact location is less important than just making sure you're giving it a little press to make sure it's stuck on there well. We're going to put one there, and it doesn't have another side to it, so we're just going to snap one on. Move into the fuse block. And so now we're going to do the same with the fuse block. So I'm going to find these flat areas, so not like where the screws come through the back. And try and put 4 little stickies on there. And then so the trick with this one is, because of the way the back of the seat box is, you don't want to go all the way down here because they'll be floating in space. So I'm going to kind of hold the fuse block up and eyeball kind of where we're at, which is right about here. And I'm going to stick it there. So you just want to make sure that everywhere you're putting these, you have a nice purchase. There we go. And again, put the other sides on. And dual lock has kind of a distinctive crunchy, snappy noise when it's all the way in. It can be kind of half pushed in. You want to make sure it's all the way in. So there's the back of the fuse block. So now we're going to move to actually attaching them to the back of the seat box. So we're going to peel these so it's exposed. So now we're going to stick the fuse block onto the back wall. Give it a good press. Now we're going to do the same with the breaker. And for ease of use, it's better if you have the yellow bar up. Give it a good press again. You can see it comes off nice and clean. So now we're going to start routing the main power that's going to feed from your auxiliary battery to your breaker to your fuse block. So the first thing you're going to want to do is lift up this piece here. And it's going to have some red wires running into it. Yours might actually have more or less depending on the options on of your van. We're going to take these connectors and pry them open. And take this off. In here you're going to see something like this. Again, your van may have more or less connections. What we're going for is this last connection here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our little MIDI fuse that says 100 amps and we're going to put it on these last two posts here. We're going to take these M6 nuts and thread them down like this, and then on the other side and I connect your red cable. Do you want to redo that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yep, so you're going to connect your red cable here. Like so. And then you're going to tighten these down. We're just going to tighten these real quick. And give them a good snug. Don't go too hard or else you might snap the studs. Now we're done in that area. I'm going to replace the cover. Like so. Now we're going to connect from that point to one side of the breaker. Now it's important to know that on the breaker, one post says BAT and one post says AUX. This side, you want to make sure goes to the BAT side, which in our case is down. So loosen that. And if you want extra access because of the dual lock, you can always remove what you're working on and grab it from there. From here, we're going to connect from the breaker to the fuse block. So I'm going to take advantage of what I just said to pop the fuse block off. Make sure you didn't bring any of your dual lock with you. This worked just fine. And on your fuse block, you depress the yellow tab. There's your fuse block. Important to note, this is positive, this is negative. They are marked, and also you can tell the negative is by these closer packed screws. So again, going to remove the positive in this instance. Grab our cable. And before I actually make this final connection here, I'm going to start doing a couple other things. So one of the things that's important to keep in mind when you're working in the seat box is mobility. You want to be able to move things around as much as possible. It makes everything easier to work on. So I'm going to actually take the fuse block and the tail we just put on it and put it aside for now. Because now we're actually going to go down to the floor of the seat box and get our ground. And our ground is a stud right there with a 10 millimeter nut on top of it. And that's grounded to the chassis itself. So let's loosen that up. So once that's loose, I usually grab it by hand to avoid losing it. There it is. And we're going to take our ground cable and attach that. So something you want to note is that there are factory connections here. In this case, there are two. Make sure when you reattach everything, those are still attached and they haven't popped off or come off or anything. Get that started and then finish it off with a hand tool, not a power tool. Get it nice and snug. And now we're going to move to connecting our fuse block. So now we're going to start adding connections to the two sides of the wiring harness. So we're just going to cut this electrical tape away. Just be, careful not to slice through your wire. You can kind of just start it and then strip it back. Now, everything is going to get a ring terminal or a blade terminal on them. These are two different colors because they're two different wire gauges. So the only important thing to know here is yellow goes on the larger gauge wire, which in this case is 12 gauge, and blue goes on the smaller gauge wire, which in this case is 14 gauge. And the way to tell them apart is the size of the wire is always printed right on the side there. It says 14 AWG, which is American wire gauge. So we're going to go ahead and start stripping and crimping. For stripping, we're using a fancy auto stripper, something that we are big fans of. I'll go ahead and grab a wire. And for your purposes, it's going to be easiest to go through and strip everything, and then crimp everything, and then shrink everything. So I'll just show you an example connection. So we've got this, which is yellow for the larger gauge. I know this is 12, because I can read it down there. And so this is a good little thing to know. There is too much wire exposed here. Truthfully, we only want about that much wire exposed. So I'm going to take a pair of cutters and trim this back. Well, now we have a much more reasonable amount exposed. So I'm going to put my connection on. And we're going to go ahead and crimp. In this case, I'm using this crimper, which has marks for the size. I always like to give it a little tug after it's crimped. Make sure it's not going to pop off. It's one of the most common things that happens when something fails. And then the last thing you do is heat shrink it. When you're heat shrinking, it's good to keep things in motion. If you turn on the flame and stay in one spot, you're probably going to burn something. So that's what you're looking for, a nice, fully sealed wire connection. So we're just going to do that a bunch more times. So now we've got all of our connections done. We're going to go through attaching them to the fuse block. Now the way to make the most sense of this is take one half of your van, put it on one side of the block, take the other half of your van, put it on the other side of the block. So what would make sense is this is going to be passenger, this is going to be driver. So each connection will be going to a positive and a negative point. So I'll go over here, find a matching pair. I will typically start with the blue outlets because they have the highest chance of popping, although they shouldn't. And kind of make sure they're clear. And then attach the red positive here and the black here. And we're just going to keep doing that. So now what you're doing is you're going to put the fuses into your fuse block. Your bags should be labeled, but in case they're not, the 5 amps go to your lights, the 7.5 amps go to your fans, and the 15 amps go to everything else. So we're going to start populating the fuse block. I know all the outlets are blue, and those are all 15 amps. And our auxiliary circuits are also 15. Though if you want, you can leave them disconnected if you don't have anything attached to the other end. So that would be the purple and orange circuit. So maybe you have a heater, maybe you have something else hooked up. And it's important to note, if you have something else hooked up, make sure you know what the actual fuse rating is for it. For example, a D2 heater does not take a 15 amp fuse, it takes a 20 amp fuse. So in this case, I'm not going to connect them because there's nothing connected. So now we've got 5 and 7.5. So 5 amps are going to go to our lights. $7.5s are going to go to the fans. When you're done, you can take your fuse block cover and label it correspondingly with a little Sharpie or a label maker or whatever you want. And so now we're going to start making our connections. So there's no specific order that you have to do this in. I'm going to start by connecting the negative to the negative post on the fuse block. And in this case, I'm actually going to have it coming off at a right angle. As long as it's secure and it's not making contact with any other wire, that doesn't matter. Then I'm going to take the positive end and we're going to go to the other side of our breaker. And this is a good time to actually start getting stuff kind of situated. So for example, we're going to bring this fuse block down and come back to where we were and kind of guide these wires make sure they're not tangled. And in the 2019s, the seat box has gotten pretty tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring our fuse block back to the wall and actually make sure that these wires here are kind of routed behind this area here. And that's a little auxiliary battery for the electronic shifter. And so we're going to bring this back down, find our mark for the dual lock, and pop it back on. Again, you should hear that little popping noise. And so you can see we've got enough slack here that we can move these wires out of the way, which we're going to want to when this section goes back together. Okay, so we've got our fuse block situated, so let's get power from the breaker to the fuse block. So here's our breaker. Gonna take the nut and lock washer off. Find the other side that needs to connect to it. And here's it's going to be important to kind of have a perspective on how things are going to get connected. So I'm actually going to dual lock this back to the wall. So now that it's kind of in its spot, I'll be able to route the wires as clean as possible. And so now we've got the feeder cable coming from the fuse block. We're going to go ahead and connect that. And in this case, we need to loosen the feeder cable a little bit to change the angle so that we can reach around to here. So in this case, I'm pulling the breaker back off because it's super tight in there. I'm going to make a connection. I know it's going to hook on like this. So I have it set up like that. Add the lock washer and add the nut. And now we're going to go ahead and reattach. And I'm going to snug the nut down that I loosened. It's always important to do that right away so you don't forget and you end up with a loose electrical connection that you have left over. And now we've fully connected, so we're ready to go. Okay, so now that we have everything connected, let's just take a quick minute to look at our flow of power. Now, this is attached to the auxiliary battery. So we have power coming from that to our breaker. The breaker is passing power to the fuse block, which is passing power to the rest of the van. And the fuse block is also grounded down to the chassis. So that gives you kind of a simple overview of how everything's set up. Depending on how you have your fuse block set up, when you go to put the cover back on, it might not fit exactly right. So there's some times where we have to trim the covers. So you can just take a snippers and get yourself through the plastic. Careful, it might be sharp. So I know there's a interference there. I'm going to check out down below. It seems like I might be able to fit it in like that. And there we go. Pops right in. So now we're going to start reassembly. And so we're going to put the bridge back into the seat box. Now, something that's important to know is that all your components are easy and they're not tangled up in any of the wires. So I've got my auxiliary fuse block, my relay, and some ignition source power points here. They're all up and out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and start lowering this into position. You're going to have some studs that the bolts were on, or the nuts were on rather. And so that's what you're just lining up for. And you're also kind of being careful that you don't end up like pinching wires underneath the feet of this transom. So I've got one there, that's down. So now I just have to find this other one and get it situated. And it's down. So I've got those attached like that, and so before I start reattaching things, I'm going to put the nuts back on, just because if I start reattaching it and it starts moving around, other things might come disconnected, and that's just not convenient. And when you come over here, this is literally going to be something where you're probably just going to have to drop this into the opening and then fasten it from there, because it is a very low accessibility point. Or you can use a magnetic tool. This one isn't super magnetic, so we're just going to try and guide it. That's set, and we're going to tighten it down. Alright, so now we're going to put our components back in this plastic tray here. So let's remember order of operations, and let's start with the relay.
You can fasten one more zip tie right here. The key for this, so that the beef pillar fits in, is that it's nice and tight into this corner. So you don't want it running down out here. And remember, this is the slot where the hooks on the back of that B-pillar go. So you want it on the outside of this slot, coming down, and then flat across here. This piece covers it. Now, it's padded underneath, so it fits over the top of it just fine. However, there's a little bit of a bump out when you put the B-pillar in. It pinches this side down, and if you're annoyed by this little bump right here, which is very minimal, but if you are, you can go ahead and just remove the padding from this part of the cover here. Just, you know, just take a razor knife and remove this padding here, and at that point this will be slipping over the top of it and not have a lump through here. Okay, so again, it's a very minimal lump. Some people don't mind, some people do mind. It really depends on your sensibilities.